Welcome. Thank you for joining our Quality Management Systems Best Practice Series webinar. I'm Becky Melody, your hostess for today's presentation. Brian McCole, QMS Practice Director, will be presenting. The discussion today will cover introductions, webinar logistics, and our discussion topic, the driving forces for quality management system continuous improvement for life sciences. The USDM team is proud to have Brian joining us in a leadership role. He offers 20 years in the application of GXP-compliant IT technology to life science organizations. He has extensive experience in life sciences, quality systems, and supply chain management. Brian has led implementations and validations of FDA-regulated global quality management and enterprise resource planning systems. He has experience in establishing business and quality management strategy, consent decree and warning letter remediation programs, and Kappa and change management processes. And he's certified as he's a certified quality auditor and production and inventory manager. USDM is focused exclusively on the life science domain. We're the market leader in providing quality and regulatory IT compliance professional service solutions. And we're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California. We've delivered successful projects with over 300 life clients. We offer hands-on experience in assisting clients under regulatory distress, and we're the market leader for validation accelerator packs. Our various dedicated practices include global quality and auditing, IT and virtualization, life sciences cloud, UDI track and trace practice, GRC, our laboratory, which is systems and equipment, ECM, ERP, PLM, enterprise quality management, manufacturing automation and equipment, clinical and drug safety, business intelligence, our CRM practice, the project and program management, and of course, our quality management systems. The content today will be covered in approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll invite you to post questions for our team via the message board on the lower left of your screen, or you can join the discussion on LinkedIn and post any questions there. We're also happy to address any questions offline at USDM@usdm.com. The presentation today is being recorded and will be available on the USDM website, usdm.com. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, and with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Brian.
Okay, Rebecca, thank you very much, and thank everyone else for joining today. And so we'll be focused today on the quality management systems and the process of improving these key critical business applications and systems. So from a gender point of view, we'll look at some of the driving forces. We'll focus on two primary areas. One is the regulatory requirements, and secondly, the business benefits. Then we'll delve into the heart of the discussion today. We'll focus on three primary areas where quality management system process improvements can occur, and we'll identify some of those improvements. We'll be looking at the front-end process of nonconformance reporting and standardization. We'll then move on to deploying a risk-based approach to your investigation process. And then we'll complete the nonconformance lifecycle focused on the effectiveness check of CAPAs and verification that the actions taken were correct and effective, and to help prevent reoccurrence. Lastly, we'll discuss some of the metrics around these to help identify the measures and the improvements or performance of the quality management system. So before we get into some of the driving forces, I guess one thing to look at first is why are we having this discussion in the first place? In many cases, it should be very obvious that improving the quality management system, which is the workhorse that manages the business processes, measures their performance, improvements to that underlying process should be a paramount task for all organizations. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why we're having this discussion today. The first is that the visibility of the quality management system is always a very key issue. In most inspections, the quality management system will be a lot of times the first area that is addressed by the inspection or the agency. So there's a tendency to not fix what's not broken. So we have a tendency to take the hands off. We'll keep it as is. We don't want to make changes to something that has that much visibility. Another reason why some processes in the quality management system are not in a continual improvement program process is that the ownership of the quality management system sometimes comes under discussion. Too often, we've seen in industry with our clients that a lot of times the quality assurance folks are the perceived owners of the quality management system. I know there's a lot of quality assurance people out there today, so I don't want to take too many shots. I'm too a quality auditor, they are no doubt a key component of a quality management system. But the QMS touches all of the business processes. Therefore, we need to make sure that all the resources that are touching those business processes are stakeholders in the QMS processes. That's third. And the third area is communication. Communicating out to the organization that the QMS is everybody's responsibility. Everybody should be proactive in maintaining and improving those processes and participating in the activities of improvement. So we're going to take a look at and hit these three topics again as we go through it: the visibility, the ownership, and the communication. So now let's first look at some of the driving forces. Okay. Both the guidances for drug and medical devices focus on two key primary areas of QMS improvement. One is that the goals and objectives of the quality management system must be stated within the quality policy itself. This helps identify what the organization is looking to get to, and then developing the process of how to get there. The second area is, as we get into the management side of it, is that we talked first about that communication. Here's where that communication comes into play. The management for the organization must be proactively advocating continual improvement. So those two common threads are really driving us to establish continual improvement of our quality management system. So here are those objectives. Again, organization must have an open and transparent process for establishing, verifying, and communicating those objectives, and then lining out the processes to meet those objectives and exceed those objectives. As we know, continuous improvement is that. It is a continuous improvement. It's a continuous process. So it's not a program that has a beginning and end date. It's ongoing activity. So let's talk. So that talks some of our from the regulatory aspect of it. Let's look at it from the business aspect. Well, continuous improvement itself has to be good. So two areas to focus on is, one is reducing the cost of quality, especially in the area of failure. And those come into two main, both internal and external costs. The internal costs that are most easily identified are time and material spent in scrap and rework activities. Improving the processes to eliminate, reduce scrap and rework, getting the product right the first time is very important. Also, the hidden costs on that are how much time as far as inspection and the added cost to track and remediate nonconformances, and in many cases, unfortunately, this is sometimes a repeated process. So reducing those identifiable costs, and secondly, then let's take a look at the business process improvement side of it. That second bullet point there increases the productivity, process, and resource efficiencies. That's what we're aiming for, is to eliminate waste in our day-to-day business processes and ongoing endeavors. Secondly, kind of a little bit out of sequence here, but is reducing redundant activities. Once again, this is also eliminating waste. A lot of this goes back to what we talked about earlier as we look at the cost of tracking and identifying the costs associated with tracking and remediating nonconformances. That cost burden has really two aspects of it. A lot of times that's redundant activities. So reducing or eliminating those activities, one, it frees up the time of the QMS stakeholders responsible for certain aspects of the quality system. And secondly, we all hate to do the same thing over again. So there's also an underlying advantage to moving forward to help improve the processes and eliminate redundancies. Lastly is we know change is going to come. Change will always be with us. It'll come in new products, new businesses, new customers, new regulations, many different aspects to that. So by having an improved and an ongoing improvement attitude towards how we manage things through the quality management system gives us that foundation to adapt to changes as they come. There's less impact. We've seen changes, we know how to handle changes, and we have a platform to move those changes forward. So that kind of wraps up some of the business processes. So let's take a look at how do we actually get to that. So we talked about some of the first things we talked about were some of the reasons we're not improving QMS as we should be. We've identified just briefly, some of the regulatory and business aspects for the improvements. Now it is a process. So let's take a look at how do we get to identify what areas we want to improve, how we want to go about it, what are the benefits. So let's take a step-by-step walk through the process for process improvement. First is being able to clearly state in a problem statement the reason and objectives for the proposed process improvement, and most importantly, is the potential benefits. Here's where we have to put our sales hat on, is that many organizations are vying for the same critical and limited resources. So identifying not just what we want to do, but what's the benefit of what we want to do is very key to identifying that in our problem statement for our continuous improvement. Secondly is establish a common practice to identify and analyze and verify causes of the problem. Key here is a common practice. The more that we are able to navigate through the QMS in a consistent, accurate, and common process for all parts of the organization will help us. We'll talk a little bit about that later as far as that environment to do that. Next is, once we identify the root causes, evaluate the effects and benefits, and one word that's not in there is the cost associated with any proposed programs or process improvements. I know it's a word that we always like to talk about, but there is a cost to doing things. We talked about the cost of failure cost. There's also cost associated with improvements, and that cost has to be weighed against what are those improvements. Therefore, the identifying the potential benefits up front is so critical. Once we get approval, and we won't go through all that process, but we know that may take a while, it may take several iterations of refinement, is to verify the effectiveness and efficiency of the solution that was proposed and implemented. And evaluate the solution on product quality, but also, and that's typically what is required from the regulatory aspect of it, but also we need to look at it from the viewpoint of employee, first safety, always key and critical, but also well-being. Many improvements will directly impact employees and how they do their day-to-day operations, what their impacts are. Many improvements should be geared just for them to improve that process, to make things more efficient for them and easier for them to do, and therefore allowing more and more effort on continuing the improvement cycle. And lastly is, we can't do any improvements in a vacuum. The quality management system is too complex and has too many touch points. So it's very critical that we know if we change one piece of the Lego build, we're not impacting other pieces. And then the other side of the coin is what we're doing in one area can now be applied to 2 other areas so we can leverage improvements made across the organization. So that kind of wraps up the first part of why continuous improvement. Now let's get into the where and whys and hows. The diagram we're looking at right now is one I use quite often in talking about the quality management life cycle. It summarizes it down to a very, very tertiary level, but the first area in the upper blue point is these are the control points. The quality management system is one of our key enterprise systems and processes. It has a touch point with all of the different controls within the organization, be it from project management, our manufacturing and development, customer resource management, any audits, both supplier, internal and external, and also inspections of our own organization, and there'll be other sources for that. Those control processes will drive into a nonconformance, drive different types of nonconformance. So think about the quality management system as a funnel where all of these aspects are funneled into our first stage of nonconformance reporting. From that stage, and here's the areas we'll talk about as far as areas for improvement. Standardizing the nonconformance reporting helps to establish a platform again that all of these different touch points will be able to identify nonconformances with the idea of reducing those nonconformances, but into a common format or process. Key here is that this upper portion of the process for the business has the most touch points to the entire organization. As I said, this is the top of the funnel. The first portion of the funnel, or valve, let's say, is identifying from the nonconformance using a risk-based approach as to what we then drive for the investigation and what areas of the investigation to focus on. And then lastly, as we get into the Kappa, and I said we'll be looking more at the Kappa Effectiveness, we'll look at those processes. So we're going to delve into these three, the nonconformance reporting, the risk-based investigation, and Kappa Effectiveness in more detail. So let's move on to that. Okay. So these are the areas we'll talk about, and then we'll lastly talk about the metrics associated with that. So I know we started a little late, so I'll keep things moving here. So starting the QMS process, key here is getting to a clear statement of what we need to do. So as I said, this is where a lot of the touch points within the QMS process occur. So it's critical to have this in an accurate and concise way so that users from the manufacturing side, from customer call centers, from others who are identifying deviations or product complaints, all have a common sense or form of how they're going to identify a complaint or a nonconformance. And there's two main areas for the identification. One is the titling itself. Sounds kind of simple, but a lot of times this is, so if these can be formatted, broken down so people can understand real quickly what's involved in this. And the second part is the problem statement itself. A problem statement, here's a case where training on how to write a problem statement is always very, very good to have, having standards for that, because this drives the entire process. So going back to our diagram, that problem statement, as we get into non-conforming reporting, will help drive very quickly how we get down into this process. And as I said, as we go into a risk-based approach to the investigation. So the solution, and so within the problem statement, identify the problem. Try not to put the blame on who did what and why and wherefore, and don't try to put the solution in there. In the format of the input, there should be that information available, but try not to clutter the problem with superfluous information. And lastly, then establish who is the accountability. That's going to be key is as we move forward, is the accountability of the process. Second area is standardizing the data capture process. That's also going to be critical as we go through. This is where the use of computer systems is very, 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 very critical. Is that helping to eliminate varying terminology. Once again, if all nonconformances look the same, it's a lot easier to identify what is done, what needs to be done. There's a lot less this going up and down, asking for questions, getting for clarifications, so that the nonconformance report can be read by someone who did not witness the event itself. And then lastly, on the standardization area of it is the identifying what information is required, that the user interface remains very constant, and that we have the information that the next level requires to identify the root cause and trending of that information. And the key here is driving us to that risk-based approach. So this is all the information that drives us to that risk-based. So going back, and I'll keep going back to this many times, going back to our diagram, our first key point here is, once again, the funnel within that diagram. is identifying what areas are to investigate and what are the risks associated with each nonconformance. Okay. As we get into risk-based approach, is that there are two main premises for applying to risk-based. It's the decision based on knowledge and linked to protection of the patient. Now, I've added a few more here because we also want to decide the patient is always critical. That's always the first point we're going to look at is how it impacts the patient for criticality. Are the employees' safety and well-being also looked at? And then thirdly is the integrity of the quality system data. A lot of determination is made on that quality system data. So the integrity of that information is again, a very, very important area to look at when we're adding the quality and the risk management approach. And then here's where the rubber meets the road is the level of effort based on that quality risk management process. So once again, a process throughout the organization that focuses on the quality management will then help identify how to apply risks to certain level areas. One thing we see many times is the one-size-fits-all type of approach to dispositioning for investigation. This doesn't use the funnel approach we've been talking about where a risk-based approach would apply. This is more the common silo where every nonconformance is touched multiple times. I've actually done studies with certain clients where a new nonconformance may be touched by 8 to 12 different people before it goes through its life cycle. So that's a key area to look at. The other area is the prioritizations that comes out of applying a risk-based approach. So the key is to get the most critical high nonconformances in the hands of those with a high priority as quickly as possible. The area where we tend to struggle with many times is the bottom end, is that something that nonconformance that has been identified as low or minor than risk, then those should be summarized and closed and sent and then managed through trending. This is always a little bit harder to do. We find that people are more reluctant to go through and trend. So let's summarize. Based on the risk level of the nonconformance, the critical or high risk should be set with a high priority and moved directly into the queues or contacts into the investigators as quickly as possible. Those with medium or medium or not as critical, those may require further investigation, but we know what resources that can maybe just be able to be done within the department, and we don't need to include cross-functional areas. And then lastly, as I said, it's the most difficult to achieve is always going to be the low ones. Is that once again the bottom of the pyramid, but it's a little goes against nature to close those out and move those quickly. But once again, the trending, because if it is a low nonconformance that continues to occur, then through trending we may have to elevate it into a higher state. Okay. All right. So checking on time here. So the other area, third area in our funnel discussion here is the Kappa and Kappa Effectiveness. This is the Kappa process is another long discussion, but the Kappa Effectiveness is really where we want to focus on today. because we really want to know that simply completing Kappa is not the end of the quality process. Too often, the completion of the Kappa closes the Kappa activity, and in many cases, or in some cases, we're going to end up with reoccurrence of the nonconformance. And we'll talk about, so this is, the Kappa is what we call the capital C. Earlier on in the process, you may have what I call the small CCs, which is the containment and immediate corrective actions taken. So you're looking for this. You're looking at the downstream Kappa process, and I'll get into the CA and PA soapbox in a minute. Secondly, the effectiveness check must be documented. It's a process, so it has a plan, it has expected outcomes, there are criteria, there are timelines, and another key point here is that the effectiveness check may not be a single point or data point in time. Effectiveness checks should, if you're setting those up, they should be allowed. You should allow for multiple occurrences of the effectiveness, multiple criteria to make sure that enough information and exposure enough cycles have been performed to verify that the corrective and preventative actions are effective. And then lastly, once the Kappa resolves the issue and is verified effective, then we close the quality loop. And I've underlined that because that is very critical. Another piece is closing that quality loop through our change control or change management processes. And here, it's, again, that's communication word. So communicating the improved state, verify adoption of the changes, and that will, again, help us promote an environment for continued improvement. So that's the Kappa effectiveness area. So now, we've gone through sorry about that. As I said, I'll always go back to my diagram here. We've gone through the processes of where some key areas for improvement occur or we can leverage. Standardizing the nonconformance reporting so that all of these touch points that come in through our control systems come into the nonconformance reporting in a similar format, similar level of content. It makes it very easier for downstream activities to occur in a more efficient and effective way. Then we hit our first valve in our funnel is adding risk-based approach to our investigations. So we are moving the low risk to our trending models, and we are then elevating our critical risks to the appropriate resources and putting them with the prioritization. And then lastly, the Kappa itself, or Kappas, because completing them is not the end of the process. The Kappa effectiveness must be deployed to verify, and it may take multiple steps or multiple data points for that verification to occur. If for some reason we believe that the Kappa does not need an effectiveness check, working the ICHQ-10, it is an option, but we must justify, and that justification should be approved as to why an effectiveness check is not to be required. Okay. So that goes through our life cycle. Now, lastly, measuring and controlling that process. Here's where, again, we get into a lot of discussion. We worked a lot with different companies who have developed their quality management measuring process. And we look at two areas. So let's talk about some of the areas that we run, some problems that we have seen as people get into this area. One is that many times too many quality metrics are identified. Remember, what we want to measure are objectives that we've stated within our quality policy. So we'll have questions around that, but is that just counting things does not always measure the effectiveness of the process. So a lot of times we do a lot of static metrics, meaning the numbers of ins and outs per period. That does help show some performance measurements, but not as much as if we move to a more dynamic metric model. A dynamic metric model looks at not just the counts as standalone over periods, but it compares the counts such as number of complaints, number of critical complaints, number of deviations, number of different the number of Kappas closed. It looks at those over as compared to something, typically a business parameter within one of our control systems, be it the product management, material control, basically any of the 6 business processes control processes identified by the FDA. So an example here of a dynamic is you may look at the number of complaints for a product and show it trending as an increase. However, if you take those same data points and compare them to the number of products in the marketplace, so if it's a new product introduction or a new release of the product or other areas, you may see that actually the number of complaints per product in the market is actually decreasing, therefore showing the opposite, showing a positive trend of product reliability. So that was one area to look at. The other area, as we're talking about here, let's talk a little bit about Kappas too, because this is where I get on a soapbox. So just very quickly, I know we're a little bit over on time. But we talk about Kappa a lot, and one of the key indicators that as an auditor I always look at when looking at different organizations is what's the ratio between corrective actions and as compared to preventative actions. That really shows you more the maturity of the QMS. The more preventative actions that are taken, that means that the individuals have time to look at preventative actions. They are encouraged to investigate and to trigger preventative actions. And once again, we are not going through the redundancy of corrections or doing corrections. So that is one of the key indicators that I always use when I'm looking at organizations to do that. Another area that has recently come up in warning letters, and this is one thing I want to make sure we look at before we close out here, in the use and tracking of metrics, is that the numbers themselves are good, and trending helps us identify our continuous performance and our attainment of our periodic goals along that timeline. But we also get into areas where certain recent warning letters where the agency is saying that's not good enough. What do you do? First, how do you know that a trend is positive or negative, especially if it's negative and it's out of tolerance? And secondly, do you have a procedure to address those? So as I said, I've seen in warning letters recently, and I work with the clients on this, is that just having the metrics and management review of them is one thing, but you need a procedure, back-end procedure of how to document the metrics, what's the source of the metric information, how they are calculated. In some cases, they may be validated as CXP data, and then identifying processes for managing any out of trends. So that's going to be key for that, from that aspect of it. And then lastly, we've gone through a lot today. Each of these could probably be in its own webinar, and I'm sure Rebecca's taking notes on that. But the other area, the last thing is having the environment for continuous improvement. We talked about at the beginning, we'll talk about here as we wrap up, is the leadership must provide stakeholders with the time and encouragement to focus on QMS and improvements in the QMS. I like to see the establishment of operational excellence teams. These really help where people start taking ownership of that process. As I said, one of the key things we talked about at the beginning that have delayed or derailed some of the QMS activities, improvement activities, is that the true ownership, and it's not just QA, it is all aspects of the business. So establishing these cross-functional teams to drive operational excellence, and that may actually be a term that I'm seeing more and more adaptation of versus continuous improvement is operational excellence, because it has a larger aspect of not just improving, but driving it to your excellence criteria. And lastly is to having the process in place, everybody ownership of it, and then staying the course, because continuous improvement is an ongoing and necessary practice. It's not as I said before, it's not a process that has a start and end date to it. So that kind of gives us the time, and as I said, I know we did cover a lot in quite a short time. It's a little more aggressive on what I wanted to cover today. So we talked about the driving forces of both the regulatory and the business processes and the cost of quality aspects of it. We talked about 3 primary opportunities, areas of improvement. Those are not the only areas. Those are large areas, and the pieces of those can be broken down for improvement, and we can help identify what that is through gap analysis and other audit investigation aspects. And then as we just summarized and we've talked about before, is the visibility, the ownership, and the communication of the quality system through identifying the quality metrics, tying the metrics to those business objectives, and measures of the QMS success. And I will end it on that note.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Becky, thanks for sharing that information, and we will open the floor to questions now. Thank you all for being with us today and sharing the information and understanding the spirit that we are looking to share knowledge to help you understand that you're on the right track, or maybe bring up some questions to help you get further along the path of compliance with our subject matter experts. Many of you are familiar with USDM capabilities. I do recognize quite a few of our established clients on the call today, but just to help those of you who may be new to us and our services, I'd just like to share that we have 3 different delivery options for you. First is our project teams, which support start-to-finish compliance, and that would be led by our SME practice directors and project managers utilizing the USDM team with various sets. And based on client preference, we can be flexible as far as availability to work on-site and or remotely. The second would be if you're needing extra hands to meet project deadlines, USDM has staff augmentation, which can support internally managed projects. And there we offer very solid team members offering skills and experience specifically needed for that project. So if you're needing somebody to help with testing scripts, etc., we're not going to place a PM in that role, right? So we're going to sit here exact needs. The goal for USDM is client delight, and that will result in our repeat business and excellent referrals. The third option for us is USDM on demand, and that's a blended on-site, onshore, offshore model for managed services. And that's development and support for validation testing. And the approach incorporates the cost savings of offshoring, yet reduces the risk, ensuring higher success than traditional offshore models. So giving you a few minutes there to type in your questions. Looks like that worked well. Our first question is from John. Brian, John is wanting to know, can you suggest some other areas for possible QMS metrics?
Okay, we may want to turn the sound off on this one. Here comes the free consulting. But, yeah, John, thank you. That is a good question. I mean, not knowing what your quality policies are, it's a little hard to say, but I would focus when developing your QMS metrics around the FEA 6 system inspection approach areas. I'll give you some examples. In production, packaging, and labeling, those are always very good areas. You look at batch or lot rejection rates. And once again, not just the numbers, but look at it as the number of rejections per total number of throughputs. So that's a good area that will be highly used and recommended. Another area is in your laboratory or testing or control area. Let's see. You'll have, this is one that I've seen only a few times, but it's a pretty good area. As we get into the out of specification areas, one way to monitor that the testing and lab performance is working well is looking at how many OOSs are actually unconfirmed. So once again, are we getting too many OOSs that end up being not confirmed and not being a non-conformance? So that might be one area. We talked briefly before about complaints. So you get into the post-market and the quality area, number of complaints over the or number of critical complaints over the total number of complaints would be one. We also discussed, just to summarize real quick, the number of product complaints over the market share and trending that information, so that once again you're looking at a more dynamic area. So that kind of gives you some of the areas that you may want to approach. But as I said, it's always good to look at it from the agency's point of view of what they're looking at. So identifying those different control points would be very, very beneficial.
Thank you, Brian. Our next question is from Nancy. She's asking, let's see, she says, you mentioned capital C and small c when describing standardizing QMS front-end process. I'm not familiar with those terms.
Oh, okay. Oh, I apologize. Those are not always industry standard terms. I guess we see a little bit more in the medical device side of it. The capital C that I referred to is for the formal Kappa process, the back-end process, and its effectiveness check. The small c, or CC, is for the containment and immediate corrections that are deployed when the event first occurs. These need to be documented. They're also very good input in helping derive what is the impact and the risk level of a nonconformance. So that information goes into that consideration for identifying the risk level also. Plus it identifies what's already been done and why certain activities needed to be done. A lot of times the containments and corrective actions are done for safety reasons and to curtail any additional impacts of the nonconformity versus the capital C, which is the Kappa, which is our more traditional back-end process with effectiveness checks. Okay, hope that helps. Sorry for the confusion.
Thank you, Brian. Our next question is from Adi. I hear the term cost of quality mentioned. Can you please elaborate?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a term that's been around for decades. I think Crosby and Duran have used it a lot when they started establishing quality management and total quality TQM models. The cost of quality, we talked, I'm going to paraphrase, but let me see if I can remember it correctly. I'm actually using the ASQ definition. Sorry. It isn't, is it? Okay, the cost of quality, it isn't the cost of creating a quality product or service. It's actually the cost of not creating that quality. So that's a key area too. Is that it comes in different flavors or different aspects to the input of determining the cost of quality. In the presentation, I focus mostly on the failure costs, the scrap, complaints, those types of areas. There's also, we talked really about the appraisal costs, where you're looking at what's the cost of resources that you deploy to investigate, identify, remediate any inspections or testing. Where else would it come into play? Audits of both internal and supplier, external audits. The cost associated with that would be part of the appraisal cost. And the other area that will come into play is the prevention costs. So what are a lot of what we talked about today were those prevention costs. So what activities, continuous improvement does come with a cost, as we said. It does have the cost word in there. So we do need to look at the benefits, but the cost of that improvement weighed against the benefit of the improvement will come into should be rolled up into the cost of quality. So I do hope that helps. But I would suggest looking at the ASQ website, and they will give you some very good ideas, especially of their definition. I used to paraphrase, so I hope I got it correctly.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. And with that, and looking at our clock here, it looks like we should be wrapping up. Thank you all again for staying on there with us. Great information, and boy, I wish we could just keep it going here. We'd like to encourage you all to visit the USDM website and find even more information about upcoming webinar events as well as previously recorded sessions. And we'd invite you to join our discussion on LinkedIn as well. You can stay up to date there with upcoming events and presentations and join some great discussions. Let us know that we're on the right track. We appreciate your feedback and would welcome suggestions for future presentation topics. Let us know how we can help you. Let us know what you need to know and what we can share there. Thanks again, Brian, for presenting, and thank you all for taking the time to join us, and appreciate this opportunity to team with you in working towards excellence and compliance. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful day.